selection, reciprocal altruism, indirect reciprocity, and network reciprocity. We also inherit from our human ancestors the capacity for something more, which I have called non-self-indexed motivation. I suggested that religion has a function in the acquisition of this capacity. This picture sees our inheritance as, in this way, a mixture. But it is interesting to compare this kind of mixture with the one Kant describes. He says that we are born with both the predisposition to good, preferring duty to happiness, and the propensity to evil, preferring happiness to duty. The predisposition to good is, he says, fundamental and part of what it is to be human. But the propensity to evil lies over the top of this and is accidental in the sense of not essential to us. We can lose this propensity to evil and still be fully human. But we cannot lose the predisposition and still be fully human. Kant is here translating, within the bounds of mere reason, the traditional Christian picture of creation and fall, which is a picture of chronological sequence. And he's restating it in terms of necessity and contingency. But if we take the evolutionary picture I've just given, the chronology is reversed. We inherit from our non-human ancestors the propensity to self-indexed motivation of various complex kinds. And over the top of this, the predisposition to good. We can still say, however, that it is only after the acquisition of the capacity for non-self-indexed motivation that the propensity to rank first one's own happiness becomes a propensity to evil. And here another doctrine of Scotus enters in. The affection for justice is, he says, the first check rein on the affection for advantage. Scotus recounts the thought experiment of Anselm about an angel who had the affection for advantage but not the affection for justice. Such an angel, Scotus says, would be unable not to will what is advantageous and unable not to will it above all. But then this would not be imputed to the angel as sin, because the pursuit of the advantageous would be triggered automatically by apprehending it in the intellect, just as bodily appetites are triggered by sense perception. There is therefore on this picture that I've been drawing still a logical priority, as in Kant, of the predisposition to good over the propensity to evil. In this evolutionary picture I've just given, we do not have a deduction of obligation from, quotes, natural inclination. We do, however, have something related, namely that our inherited capacities provide one set of limits to what Kant calls real as opposed to merely logical possibility, where real possibility has to be grounded in something actual. On the doctrine that ought implies can, obligations have to be fulfillable by creatures like us, given the assistance actually available, although not necessarily by creatures like us on our own. If God's assistance is one kind of assistance that is available, the question is what assistance God has in fact offered to beings with our propensities, rather than what assistance it is logically possible for God to provide. We are learning from recent work in game theory and evolutionary psychology that the propensities we have inherited are in fact more complex than we had thought. Martin Novak, for example, says that we have to add a third component to the essential mechanisms of evolution. Not just random mutation and natural selection, but cooperation. Cooperation, as I described earlier, does not yet give us motivation, and is consistent with motivation exclusively by various complex forms of the affection for advantage. But human beings are also capable, at least on the Kantian picture of morality, of a kind of cooperation that does require motivation of a certain kind, namely, cooperation willed for the purpose of the fulfillment of moral obligation. A divine command theorist is likely to hold that God commands a kind of life that God does offer assistance to us to live. And it is assistance that takes creatures like us, with the propensities we have, to the capacity for this new kind of cooperation.
Why don't you answer?
Yeah, not a question about SCOTUS, but just a question I always have about divine demand theories that isn't answered in your paper, but perhaps is answered elsewhere, or perhaps you haven't answered it anyway. And the question is this: something seems fundamentally to be ungrounded here, and this, of course, what would make it obligatory for us to obey God? Can't just be the divine command, because we can ask about that one.
Yes.
There's some kind of regress.
Well, in a way, this is a question about SCOTUS. But I think SCOTUS has a plausible reply to that worry. He thinks that the second table of the law, of the Decalogue, is contingent. But the first table of the law, that is our duties to God, is necessary. And it's a necessary principle that God is to be loved. And that's not something that has to be explained or justified in some way, because God is the best thing there is, and therefore it's obvious that God is to be loved. So if you make the distinction between the first and the second table in that way, that gives you at least a way to approach the question that you've just asked.
So then you might be stuck with this problem of the first table, but then it isn't applying or...
Yes, I think you might have... That's right. For SCOTUS, you do have deductivism of the first table, but not of the second table of the law.
I found this very interesting. I'm not sure I followed it all, but let me see if I can propose something and then raise a question about it. I took it that where God's assistance was coming into play more was with more altruistic actions, or altruistic, the carrying out of altruistic actions, the things that connected up to personal advantage. That was more, we could more grounded naturalistically. We would have had problems motivating us to do those. Is that sort of right? It's the altruism part of morality that God's assistance comes into bear with respect to.
That's the assistance that I was talking about.
Right. Okay. Well, then it looks like there could be a problem in the punishment system we use here, because if people commit crimes against others, and so they don't observe these other regarding obligations, and now the question is, well, what kind of people commit these crimes? Well, if they're theists or they're Christians, well then they had access to this motivation. We can kind of come down on them. They didn't use it or whatever. But if they're agnostics or atheists, they don't have access to it, and so we might take it as kind of an excusing condition on them.
Yes, that's a good point.
Let them off a little bit easier, because they didn't really have the wherewithal to observe these other regarding norms.
I think that's a good question. I don't, however, hold that God offers this assistance only to theists.
Well, you mean you get it even though you don't even know you're getting it?
Yes, it's possible to receive divine assistance without knowing that you are so receiving.
How does that happen? I mean, you get this urge. What is it? What happens?
Well, I'm going to explain to you how God does it.
Why are you hypothesizing that He does then? I mean, it doesn't look. I mean, so it comes to the. It doesn't. It comes to the Christian and the theist and the non-theist alike. It just and there. Well, I would have thought that. There must have been some advantage to be a theist or to be a Christian here for the purpose of carrying out the moral life.
Yes.
Now you're saying, no, it doesn't. There's no advantage because everybody gets this motivation.
Yes. I think there's an advantage, but not the advantage that it enables you to receive the assistance. So the way Kant puts it, this is something I said I might talk about, but I didn't, is that the position of Spinoza, who Kant takes to be a righteous man, who was not a theist. I think perhaps unfair to Spinoza, but that's Kant's view. He thinks that the position of Spinoza is rationally unstable. So the advantage of the theist is not that the theist gets the assistance and nobody else does, but the theist has a way to explain it or to understand it or to make the undertaking of the moral life stable in a way that the non-theist does not.
I can go in another direction, but I'll
sir. You had a question about evolutionary psychology game theory. As you tell the story, in a certain way, almost everybody can tell the story, in those ballad days, we thought that we are, as a result of our evolutionary inheritance, going to be self-interested, and then we have to account for altruism, and so it has to be explained somehow. Now people think they've discovered that, we're as likely to be altruistic in the normal course of things as to be self-interested, and so the task of explanation is different. I suspect that this is just a reversal of the original mistake. Yes. Because it seems to me that the original classification was crude and unsubtle and wrong. If one looks at actual animal behavior in certain species, it's very obvious that certain animals delight in cooperating with various kinds. I'm thinking here of dolphins that play with each other, and one gets the whole spectrum from a sick animal that is preoccupied solely with itself, to the other extreme, quite striking cases, I can't give examples from dolphins, but certainly from gorillas, of self-sacrificing behavior for the sake of the other.
Yes.
So I take it this polarity of being either self-interested or altruistic. Now we used to think it was all self-interested, now we also think it was altruistic to explain. This actually was wrong in both cases, and the task of explanation is a quite different work. I don't know what bearing this has, any on your argument. I think it does have bearing on the way we think about motivation in these cases.
Well, I think the position is not quite as you describe it. The people who are that I read anyway, and that I go to conferences with, who are game theorists and evolutionary psychologists, don't say there's nothing about altruism that needs to be explained. Right? I mean, there is still this mystery about how it is that humans are capable of something that we don't yet observe in non-human animals. Now, one difficulty here is that we're talking about observation in the case of non-human animals, and we don't really know how to get to the motivation of animals yet, of non-human animals. We can observe preference strategies which involve cooperation, as you say. As I read the literature on the primates, we don't have yet anything amongst the primates like the Good Samaritan. We don't have self-sacrifice for the sake of somebody outside the genetically related group. We have various forms of social control, we have kin selections, and various things that I went through. So there still seems to be some kind of difference, and there still seems to be something that needs to be explained. But where I agree with you is, what we're inheriting from non-human animals is much more complex. It's a mixture. And so it's not simply crass self-interest as opposed to altruism. There's already a mixture in the non-human animal.